Well, go on, everybody. Lennox here from Simple123 Trader. This is the weekly outlook playbook for the week of March 28th to April 2nd. Hope everybody's doing well and are safe. I'm going to start off with a look at the futures for the upcoming week, starting with the Australian dollar and going down the list to the US technology group. Okay, so Australian dollar. We've been following this very strong move up in the last while, in the last few weeks. It's been very strong, but now it's taken a turn to the downside. And what it looks like overall, I'll just give you an overall and then a little more detail. So we've made quite the move up, hit resistance, we're pushing back down. So right now it looks like we're going to retrace this entire move, at least back down towards this level over the coming months. So Australian dollar has been very strong, but now something is going to be a catalyst to cause it to weaken in the next while. So we could see prices coming back down to previous support area. Of course, price will more than likely touch this level first, maybe bounce back up. We're seeing a head and shoulders pattern setting up here, so we're at the neckline. So it looks pretty much like we're heading to the downside in a dramatic way. So weekly time frame, we're in a downward mode. Daily time frame, now we can really see the head and shoulders pattern quite clearly. And of course, because we're at the neckline, we could see a bounce in the short term that could take us back up towards the shoulder. At this point, we could come back up in there before we kind of gyrate down. But in either case, we're in a very weak situation. Any bounces would be opportunities to go short Aussie dollar. Okay, so going into this week, like I say, we could see short-term bounce to the upside, but that will be again short-lived. Okay, so that's the Australian dollar. Bitcoin. This is the monthly chart, straight up in the air, 90-degree. Not much to say about that. Weekly, again, very straight up in the air. And we broke through 60,000 as I analyzed and called it out, and now we've pulled back a little bit. Are we done? Probably not. I think Bitcoin has lots of room to go, and right now we're sitting at a crucial point. You can see it's opened up higher, so we are indeed heading higher as expected. So that move to the downside was short-lived, and now we're pushing back to attack the previous highs. So we could, before the end of this week, see 65,000 for Bitcoin, no problem. Okay, so Bitcoin looking pretty strong going into this week. Crude oil. Now, crude oil has been in a kind of a topsy-turvy type of mode because of ship being stuck and all kinds of stuff. So we hit a very strong resistance area, and that's also on the monthly time frame. So on the weekly time frame, we have, again, we're at that resistance point. We're pulling back a little bit on that. So what's happening now? We're consolidating in the short term. So right now we're in a consolidation mode, and I'm more than likely we're going to see further declines in crude oil, maybe back down to at least this level before we bounce off. So some weakness in crude oil going into this week, and I think probably more than anything, the catalyst is, of course, that ship that's still stuck in the Suez Canal and might be causing all this problem for oil. Okay, let's take a look at the Canadian dollar. Canadian dollar on the monthly, just like the Aussie, also reached a peak resistance area and is now looking to pull back. on the weekly, we are heading back down. So we could see prices coming all the way back down to these areas in the short term to these areas, but in the long term, we could come all the way back down. So a very weak looking Canadian dollar going into this week. And on the daily, okay, still very weak. Support area is here, so we have quite a ways to come down before it, if at all any turn. But I don't see any turnaround here. It's just going to be heading straight down more than likely for the Canadian dollar. So weakness in the Canadian dollar going into this week. Okay, the U.S. dollar. On the other hand, okay, on the monthly. Um, you can see that we came right back down to support area, and we are now bouncing back up with a lot of strength. However, I think that may be short-lived. Let's see on the weekly. Okay, we've come up quite a bit from this low, and I'm still seeing that maybe we're at a very critical area. We could see a turnaround if this continues, especially if it breaks this level. Then we're heading up indeed, but and that would be definitely possible. But we could be at a very critical point where this could turn back down one more time. But it's looking pretty strong at this point. So looking on a daily. Again, I am seeing that perhaps we're very, very close to the area of resistance here that will turn us back around. So I'm kind of going with that. I think we're going to be short term up, but we're going to be turning around and heading back down imminently. If I'm incorrect, of course, price breaks this level, then all bets are off and we're heading straight back up. But I think it's going to be hard pressed to even break this level at this point here. So we'll see. Okay, so a little bit of strength in the U.S. dollar going into the session, but further weakness perhaps coming up during the week. The euro on the monthly. Okay, so euro also hit a peak like the Aussie and Canadian, and have turned back dramatically to the downside. Very much so. We're still heading down. Next area of support is here, so we've got a ways to go. And on the daily, we're still heading down and not looking like anything is going to buoy this back. So support is way down here. So we've got all that room to drop. So weakness in the euro going into the session and this week as well. The Swiss franc has also hit a peak and has dropped dramatically. So you see this drop here could be a portending prices in the Aussie, the Canadian, the Euro, and so on. So maybe the Swiss is ahead of everyone else, but it looks like this is what's setting up weakness continuing for the Swiss franc going into this week as well, and still heading down with weakness. So I don't see any turnaround at this point. For the Swiss franc, we're still heading straight down. Gold has still struggling. It's at a very critical point for gold. We've come back down to a previous resistance support area, and possibility of this now turning and going back to the upside. So with weakness in oil and the dollar and so forth, we could see gold being a buy. Okay, so looking right now again on the weekly, we're right at a support. It looks like we're getting ready for a push back to the upside for gold, at least in the short term. Looking pretty good that we might be done the move to the downside and we could be turning around to the upside. So some strength in gold going into this week. The Japanese yen also has had quite the drop and it's been very weak, one of the weaker currencies, still looking pretty weak, although we're at a support area. Still have a bit more support below, so we could see one further drop before we turn around in the Japanese yen. It's still very weak, so it looks like there's still a bit of weakness to come. So a little bit more down in Japanese yen going into this week. The New Zealand dollar. Okay, this is the monthly, and a lot different than the other like the Aussie, for example. You can see that this one has had previous highs way up there, but we reached a prior peak and resistance area, and we're now turning and retracing the move. So what we're doing right now is just retracing this move, so we could see prices coming back way down to these areas here. That's on the monthly. Drop into the weekly. We're still on our way down, and we had a sort of a quasi head and shoulders here, and we're dropping through the neckline and heading down towards support. So looking at the New Zealand dollar as very weak, and I would see continued weakness going into this week. We could get a little bit of a bounce here, but again, it would be short-lived, and we'll continue to the downside. The Mexican peso. Okay, this is the monthly. So we had a nice push up for a while, and looks like we are at a point where we could see further gains in the Mexican peso. So on the weekly, we had a pullback, but that pullback could be over, and we could be seeing a turnaround in the long term anyways, but in the short term we could see a little bit of further downside, just short, because this move we could come back down before we turn to the upside. So a little bit of weakness short term, but I could see further strength in Mexican peso going into the remainder of the week. The British pound. You can see just like the euro and the Aussie and the Canadian, it reached a peak and is pulling back. So is it going to continue weak? It looks like that's the case. We could be heading down for quite a while. On the daily, we're still heading to the downside. So I'm not seeing a turnaround at this point. Maybe a little bit of strength short term, very short term, but more continued weakness going into the rest of the week. So weakness in the British pound overall. Silver on the monthly also had pullbacks in the last couple of weeks, but are we done at this point? We could be. Looking still a bit weak though, so I think maybe we have a further weakness going into this week. We're at a very critical area as well. We could see one further drop into this area before we get that turnaround move out and up. But right now, a little bit of weakness in silver to start the week off. Looking at the Russell 2000 monthly, we've been way up there. We've got a lot of indecision now. We've got an indecision candle, a spinning top. So looking pretty weak at this point. Looks like maybe we might continue further weakness into the week. So the move, we've come right back down to a previous support area, and the bouncing off that low. So we could see a further drop before we get that move back going back up. So maybe a little bit of weakness to start the week off. And let me just I'm going to drop down to the 4 hour just to kind of get a gauge of that. Okay, so what I'm referring to here is that our moves to the downside might be over at this point, and now we're getting that move to the upside. So in the short term, we're going to get a pullback before we get that push back out of there. So a little bit of weakness starting the week off, but I think things will pick up as time goes on. The Dow on the monthly, also very strong right now. No red candles whatsoever. It's just been very strong. Going to the weekly, also still very strong. On the daily, still looks like it wants to challenge these highs. Again, we could see a little bit of a pullback first because we're challenging those highs. So if I go to the 4 hour on this chart, similar to US 30, US 2000, you can see that we could, because we're coming back to this previous high area, we could see some challenges in here before we escape to the upside. But it looks overall strength in the Dow going into the week. The S&P 500, the S&P 500 also super strong, challenged the previous highs, has broken through the previous highs, so it's making records and looks pretty strong, but we're right against resistance and is going to have a little bit of a battle as we get up to make new highs again this week. So dropping to the 4-hour on this one, what we're going to see is yes, a little bit of a battle as we come to this area, but we could easily break through and continue higher as the week unfolds. The U.S. Technology Group, now this has seen some dramatic drops this week, the past week. So are we still going to drop or are we going to turn around? Let's take a look on the weekly. We are at a consolidation area on the daily. It looks like we reached a pretty strong support resistance area here, and now we bounced. So we could see a little bit of weakness in the short term tomorrow, in the markets, and then I would expect further moves to the upside. If I'm totally wrong, we're going to break these lows and continue down, but I really don't see that happening at this point with strength in the US 500, the US 30, and the US 2000. All right, so that's a look at what's setting up for the week for the futures. The futures helps you to pinpoint what's going on with the currencies. For example, if you look at the US dollar, it'll help you trade the Aussie and the Euro and the New Zealand and Japanese yen, Canadian dollar, and so forth. So the US dollar is a catalyst for those pairs, and the Dow and the S&P, the Russell are catalysts for the stocks that everyone trades. So as those move, so does the market. All right, so profitable trading to everyone. Be safe. We're done now. Thank you.